Tonight?
That's good.
Oh.
So you won't be calling me out if I fit up a little bit here and there. But the one thing I wanted to say before we start the camera rolling is I'm going to talk about about what general life is like on a submarine, in my experience. But what I can't really get into, which some of you may be curious about, is what we did and where we went.
Well, then you need to leave. If we're not going to hear that, you need to go.
So I just didn't want you to be offended if you did ask a question like that, and I would have to say, I can't tell you, sorry, and then move on. So
We won't pass it on.
But what I'd like to have tonight is just, I don't want to give a speech. So please ask questions. And if you think of questions if you have questions that I haven't thought of, then ask them, because I would like to have a conversation. I did bring notes, so I do have things, stories, we call them, well, there's lots of different things we call them, but I have lots of sea stories, and I'd like to share a couple of those with you tonight.
Good.
Cool.
Kathy?
You want me to?
What do you want to be videotaped?
I lost the podium. There, I'll do this.
Let me stand with you.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'm ready whenever you are. Okay, good evening, everybody. We have a submariner with us, as if you didn't know already. Jim and Charlene came for Mark's talk, and then somebody told me he was in the Navy and had been on a submarine. I'm thinking that's Dan, since they both are in the Miata Club together, and he thought he was getting out the door. Yeah, determined to have him talk. So this is a first. We are having a fireside chat, and it is a chat, not a talk. Okay, good. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to sit with you. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. If I my volume starts to go down a little bit, just do what I do.
Okay, closer.
So I want to start out by telling you a little bit about me, because I was not the typical submariner. I was actually a cryptologist. I enlisted in the delayed entry program in February of 1973 when I was still in high school, and then went on active duty in July of '73. Spent my 18th birthday in boot camp. So I'm waiting for years to be able to drink beer legally, and found myself having a birthday in boot camp. And do you think they gave me a beer for my birthday?
No, absolutely not.
No. Yeah. So anyway, so I came in when I was 17 years old. My mom signed the papers. My dad wouldn't, because he was Army, didn't like the Navy, and didn't want me joining the Navy. So I chose the Navy because I didn't know a whole lot then, but what I did know was I was not mature enough to go straight to college. I knew I'd get to college, I'd party, I'd be able to drink that beer, and I would flunk out. So I thought the Navy sounded pretty good. Can do 4 years in the Navy, come back home. Maybe by then I'll be ready to use the GI Bill, go to college. It just seemed like a good plan. So my best buddy and I signed up at the same time, went to boot camp together. We then split ways, because he went to the submarine service. He went to a submarine, I think it was USS Sculpin in San Diego. And they sent me to Monterey, California, to the Defense Language Institute to become a Russian linguist. And I thought that sounded pretty cool too, until I got there and realized they were serious about this. This was 1 year of full-time study, every day, having the Russian language crammed down my throat. And I thought, what an idiot. You joined the Navy because you weren't ready for college level work. And here
How
I
much
am.
of your Russian do you still remember?
Das Ladonia, huh?
There you go, thank you.
How about Nostrovia?
Okay, so we can have a completely different session here tonight. Yes, служу. Это было много лет назад. К сожалению, я почти все забыл.
Thank you. I took all that in.
So after a year in language school, they sent me to tech school, and all I was doing in Monterey was learning the language. I knew learning nothing about the Navy, nothing. Had no idea why the Navy wanted Russian linguists. Had no clue. But then they sent me to Goodfellow Air Force Base in Texas, tech school, and that's where they taught me finally, told me what I would be doing with the language and what the opportunities would be, which for a Russian linguist back in the Cold War, there were many opportunities and that I could choose from. And one of those that they mentioned was submarines. And I said, that sounds cool. I'll do that. So after Goodfellow, and unfortunately my wife Charlene couldn't make it tonight, but she would have me say right now that that's where I met her, and that's where we got married. We met in mid-October. I proposed in mid-November, and we were married in mid-December. We did everything that a master sergeant or a commanding officer would not want his soldier, sailor, or airman to be doing at tech school. That's what we did, and going on 49 years now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It worked out pretty well. We went from Goodfellow to Misawa, Japan. I don't know if anyone knows where Misawa is. It's up in northern Honshu. Dan did a tour there as well, and we loved it. Experienced some pretty cool things like earthquakes. And Charlene would tell you because she remembers it today as if it happened yesterday. I was at work. I was on a midwatch, and she was home. In the middle of the night, we had an earthquake, and I'd experienced some earthquakes when I was in California, but this one literally shook our world. And the thing that I didn't know about, and the shaking didn't scare me, the earth was growling, groaning. You could hear the earth. It was so loud that it drowned out other things in the house that were shaking. You know, the window panes were rattling, but the earth just moaned, kind of like a whale was underneath us. Scared her to death.
That'd be scary.
And we had a little bit of excitement at work because we had drop ceilings with all those square panels, and we had posts that were designed to be earthquake proof. So when the earthquake hit, they were watching them go like this, and the panels were all falling. And we were on the midwatch, middle of the night, and one of the sailors was in his four-legged chair, asleep, leaning against one of those posts. Well, when the ground shook, the chair went out from under him. He went on the deck. So I learned a lot about earthquakes. All right. So, waiting up to prepare for submarine deployment. It was a long qualification process, and they first sent me to sea on a cruiser, USS Reeves. We went through the Tsushima Strait up into the Sea of Japan. The Russians harassed us the whole time. They overflew us. AGIs followed us. They would cut in front of us. They would do all the Cold War stuff that the Russians did. And this was my first time at sea. Well, about the day after we came up through the Tsushima Strait, we hit seriously foul weather. Where I worked was in a, what we call it an oik span. It was kind of like a Connex van bolted to the deck of the ship. And to get to there, I had to go out through a door outside the skin of the ship, across the deck, and then go into this van. Well, until we got on station, we were just in there training, making sure our equipment worked, stuff like that. And weather was beautiful, life was good. I was due to stand my first operational watch at midnight. And so right after dinner, I hit the rack. And before dinner, we hit the bad weather. And this cruiser just started rolling like a pig, serious rolls. But when they designed the ship, they had enough sense that they put the tables in the mess decks longitudinally, and some chairs on each side. And I was first hanging on as we were rolling, and then I saw what the experienced sailors were doing, and I thought, okay. What they would do is they had their tray of food, and when we rolled to starboard, they picked up their tray, and their chair slid back until they hit the table or the person behind them. And then as it rolled back the other way, you slid up to your table, you put your tray down, you ate a couple bites, as much as you could eat, and then as it rolled back, you picked up your tray. That was fun. Well, I got off the mess decks and hit the rack, and just couldn't get to sleep, and I just got sick as a dog.
Oh.
Just awful. So when midnight came around, I'd already made a couple of trips to the head, and was laying in my rack, just thinking I was going to die. And all this is a prelude to why did I choose submarines? Suddenly, there's somebody shaking me. What? Brokaw, you're due on watch. I can't, I'm sick. Doesn't matter, you're due on watch. Get up and go to work. And so I had to, but I'm sick. We got plastic bags for you, don't worry about it.
No sympathy.
Yep.
And I walked out of the ship, and it was different because it's the first time I'd been up at night, and the passageways weren't lit with white lights, they were lit with red lights because it was dark outside. So it was dim, red lights, and everything kind of seemed different to me, and I was worried I was lost because nothing looked right. I opened the door to the deck, and the wind must have been at 40 or 50 knots, and the rain was just coming down in sheets, and it was black.
What is knots in,
In English?
yeah, thank you.
Well, a knot's a little bit greater than a mile
Okay.
per hour.
Okay.
So, pitch black, plus rain hitting me in the face, and I had to find that van, and I'm trying to remember, where is it? What can I hold on to while I'm getting there? And the guy that was nice enough to wake me up wasn't nice enough to go out with me. So I did find it eventually, literally feeling my way around, and I got in there and got to work. We weren't in very long, and as the ship came out of the Sea of Japan, they decided, I don't remember anymore where they were going, but they didn't need us on board anymore. So they said, when we woke up in the morning, they said, we're going to fly you off this afternoon. And I said, good. Please, fly me off. I want to go home. This was not fun. It was still rough. But the helo was up and running, and they got us all in line. They lined us up by seniority, and we started loading. Well, we started loading the helo in a relatively calm, but suddenly we were rocking again. So, stop, Brokaw. I was a junior person, I was last in line. I was the only one that didn't get on helo. And up the helo goes, I'm about to cry. Yeah, so it's up there hovering above, and they're waiting to see if it calms down a little bit. And then they finally lowered a horse collar for me. And they walked me out there, they brought the horse collar down, put it around me, and before they could winch me up, the ship took a roll, and I'm hanging on to this horse collar, sliding backward off the deck of the ship. And so suddenly I'm swinging over the ocean, and I thought, maybe the Navy was not such a good idea.
I can understand that.
So that was my first experience at sea. And I went back to my command, and I continued to work to qualify for a submarine deployment. And finally did. And in 1975, late 75, I made my first submarine deployment. And it was cool. I'll tell you, I was asked earlier, was I scared? You're darn right I was scared. I'd never seen a submarine in my life. I'd seen pictures, but I'd never seen a real one. And went across the brow, and I'm looking at this hole, and it has a ladder going straight down, and I've got my big sea bag, and the hull's not flat, it's round, and but I made it down, and it stunk. Man, it did stink. Enough to kind of make me a little bit queasy. But got in, got settled in, and then when we got underway, I found out that submarines ride worse on the surface than surface ships do.
Yes.
It was awful, once again. But once we got out to the continental shelf and we dove, it was nice. Nice, even ride. And I thought, maybe this isn't so bad after all. And so I did this deployment, and it was a fairly short deployment. It was my shortest deployment. It was about 50 days I was underway.
That's short.
And came back home. And they had a backlog at work. So usually when you're on a deployment, you get what we call basket leave, where they go home, spend some time with your wife, her get caught up, you get caught up, you relax, and then come back to work. Well, I was home maybe 2 days, and they called and said, hey, we're really backlogged here. Can you come in and help us out? And I said, okay. So back to work I went. And I was there for maybe a week. I was working, and my operations officer, somebody tapped me on my shoulder, and I looked around and saw it was my operations officer. He was a commander. I was a seaman, and my first thought was, what did I do? Am I in trouble? And he said, hey, Brokaw, we need you to go home and pack your bag. We're sending you back to sea. And I said, I just got back. I gave up my basket leave. And he says, well, I know, but we need you to go back and pack your bags. This was 10:30 in the morning. And I said, okay, when am I leaving? He said, you have to be at the runway at noon. Today? Yes. You have to be at the runway at noon. And I said, okay. So I called Charlene, and she thought I was joking. I thought he was joking. She thought I was joking. So I misspoke when I talked about my first submarine deployment. It was actually 76. I got to Masala in 75. So my first submarine deployment was 76. So how many have heard of the DMZ axe murder in 1976, August 1976? in the demilitarized zone in Korea. Some enlisted troops and a couple of officers went out to trim a tree, just trim a tree, because it was blocking their view of part of the DMZ that they wanted to be able to see. The North Koreans attacked them and killed the two officers using an axe and axe handles. The U.S., Gerald Ford was president at the time, was not happy. And we surged Air Force, we activated or brought Army up to readiness, and the Navy sent the Midway Battle Group into the Sea of Japan. So at noon, I was on the flight line at Misawa. They loaded me onto a P-3 Charlie and flew me to Atsugi. The Midway was already underway, and I got on a what's called CH-46 Marine Corps helicopter. Started to take off. They couldn't get the cargo door up. This is my first experience in a helicopter, and I've never liked helicopters. Couldn't get the cargo door up, and what do we do? Well, we got to get this guy out there. Okay, we're going. And so I flew out to sea with wonderful view the whole way, and they landed me on the deck of the Kitty Hawk. The Kitty Hawk, the Midway, which was my second aircraft carrier. On my way home from the Reeves, that helicopter ride that I told you about, they flew me to the Kitty Hawk, and then I got to get catapulted off the Kitty Hawk to fly home. That was cool. So I landed on the Midway, immediately went down to get to work, and the Midway was fully loaded. As soon as we got within range, we started flying sorties, and all the planes were fully loaded. And I was watching them. I was up on deck, and I was watching them move weapons, and there were Marines out there. And so I asked the guy, why do we have Marines on deck to load weapons? And they told me whenever we are handling nuclear weapons, there's always a Marine security guard present. So we were loaded for bear after that axe murder. The U.S. was serious. The North Koreans blamed it on us, but eventually they apologized. A sort of apology, the best you could ever get from the North Koreans. And we stood down, and I got catapulted off again and flew home. Really cool. And that deployment was only 30 days, thank heavens, because if it had been any longer than 30 days, it would have been really bad news. So I was happy to get home from that. So the USS Midway, in 1976, this is the story I want to tell about our Navy then. It was not good. Post-Vietnam War, morale in the Navy, morale in all of the services was low. Drugs were a real problem in the fleet, and pretty much throughout the services, a real problem. On the USS Midway in 1976, we had gangs on board, and we had racial issues, and we had urban gangs from LA, from Chicago. Big ship, a lot of people, and young people. It was bad. We had you have a buddy rule in the Air Force? My first experience with the buddy rule was on Liberty. You go into the port, they want you not to go out on your own. Always have a buddy with you for safety and keep you out of trouble, or keep you from getting in trouble. We had a buddy rule on the ship. If you were not allowed to move around the ship by yourself, it had to be at least two of you. We lost sailors overboard. We lost an officer overboard. They just disappeared. We had a fire set on the ship, intentionally. It was terrible. And so when I got off the Midway and kissed the ground again, I said, this is it. I am done with the Navy. When my enlistment's up, we were going home. But then in '77, they sent me on my second submarine. And once again, it was great. I loved it. And so why did I love it? A professional crew. Absolute professionals. One team. And in my time in the Navy up to that, I'd never seen that. And I saw it on the first submarine, but not to the same extent as the second submarine. The whole crew, it's a tight crew. No thefts on a submarine. Still today, every submariner is a volunteer. It's a 100% volunteer force. So you volunteer to get in, and if you don't fit, or you're not perceived to fit, then you are volunteered to get out. If you have trouble with claustrophobia, if you have trouble getting along with your neighbors, if you're caught stealing anything, you're out. So what's left is a good crew that depends on each other. Depends on each other's for their lives. And I want to read one quote. There is no margin for mistakes in submarines. You are either alive or dead. And that was how they treated life on that second submarine that I rode. And this quote is from Admiral Sir Max Horton, Flag Officer of Submarines, Royal Navy, sometime between 1940 and 1942. And I've always carried that with me. And so now what I do? I was determined I was getting out of the Navy. I'd already told my command I'm getting out of the Navy, and I liked it. So Charlene and I talked for a while, and she said, well, you liked it, right? I said, yeah. And she said, well, why would you want to get out? So we stayed in. And I stayed in for a little over 41 years. So I enlisted in 1973, advanced to E7, Chief Petty Officer. Was enlisted for 12 years, got a direct commission, and then spent just shy of 30 years commission. I made 8 submarine forward deployments on 6 different submarines.
What did you do?
The first one in 1976, my last submarine deployment was in 1989. So we stayed in, and we made a career out of it. So that's my background, probably a little bit more than you needed to hear, but that's how I got into submarines. So I was not a normal submariner. I was never actually assigned to a submarine. We never lived on a submarine base. I and my team embarked submarines when they went on to forward area mission. Submarines would do fairly long deployments. They would do 4 to say 6 months deployed, but they would make port calls, they would show the flag, they would do a lot of exercises, Navy exercises with foreign navies, and then typically during that deployment, they would do 1 or 2 forward deployments. When the crew of a submarine saw us coming aboard, they didn't like it because they knew that they were getting ready to deploy. So the crew, up until pretty much when we walked aboard, they didn't know they were doing an operational deployment. They kind of figured that at some point that they would, and they didn't have any idea how long that deployment would be, and they didn't know where we were going. That was the crew. It's worse for the wives and the families, and so I need to talk about that, or Charlene will hit me over the head with a skillet. When I and my team left home and got on a plane, our wives didn't know where we were going. They had no idea how long we were going to be gone, and we couldn't communicate with them. And they couldn't be told when we were coming home until 48 hours before we reached port. So when we left, we just went into a black hole. And the wives got to stay home and raise the kids with no idea where we were, what we were doing, or when we'd be coming home. And,
Why didn't the families know sooner than 48 hours?
Operational security.
Yeah, operational security.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Were they able to communicate with you while you were on submarine?
So they were. In my first couple of submarine deployments, they were allowed to send familygrams. So for the deployment, they could send 4 familygrams over the course of the deployment, 25 words each. And I have an example of one of my familygrams in the binder here. And that was it. We couldn't reply. No email then, no phone calls. They sent these familygrams, 25 words. It got better though. In my later submarine deployments, they raised it to 50 words.
So you had to choose your words carefully.
That was good. You had to choose your words
Yeah,
carefully. And of course, that's another submarine, that's another sea story. The radioman on board who received the familygrams off the broadcast, type them up, they'd have fun with them. The really juicy ones, they take the name off of it and then post them in the passageway, where a young wife got personal.
Yeah.
And so they'd post them, we'd all read them and laugh, and then we'd have to guess, okay, who was this? And then bad ones, where so bad is death in the family. I'm leaving you. I can't take this anymore. When you get back, I'll be gone. Illness, serious illness. The chief of the boat, the XO, and the commanding officer would decide whether or not they would share the familygram. They knew their sailors. They knew their sailors well, and so they would take that into consideration, the stability of the person. And sometimes they would tell them, and sometimes they would not. Until we were coming home. They would never let a sailor get surprised, but they often did not want to pass bad news while we were on a deployment, because we had to stay focused. So I owe my wife a debt that I will never be able to repay. But by golly, I keep trying. Because she put up with a lot.
In the officers' mess, or the officers' area,
The wardrobe.
the wardroom, correct. You talk very much about the wainscoting on the sides, on how it moves, depending on your depth.
So it's not just the bulkheads.
Okay.
Um,
They might not know what I'm referring to.
Great question. And I hadn't thought about this. So there's a couple of technological things I'm going to get into, time permitting. When a submarine dives, the water pressure gets pretty intense. And I don't remember off the top of my head, it's like another 44 pounds per square inch per maybe 100 feet, maybe less than that. But at depth, there's a lot of water pressure. We've got a steel hull, and the water pressure causes the hull to compress. So when you're going deep, my first time on board, it was scary enough when they rang the diving alarm and closed the hatches and we're going deep for the first time. As we were going deep, I started hearing all this creaking. And that creaking was really two things, but primarily it is the hull shrinking, the steel shrinking. So there is a limit to, just like on an aircraft, there is a limit to how many cycles you can do on a hull. As we go down and it compresses, we come up and it decompresses. And the sound that it makes coming up is a different sound than the sound that it makes when you're going down. And so as the hull compresses, everything else in the submarine compresses as well. So you can see that, and you can hear it also. In later submarines, we did a really good job of taking care of that secondary noises. You know, the vast majority of the interior of a submarine floats now. It's kind of like the engine mounts on a car. It's sound isolated from the hull, so that sound doesn't go out and give us away. But great question.
What did it feel like when you're going down all that extra pressure?
No difference.
Okay.
No difference. Now, there are times that we feel pressure during certain evolutions, and I'll talk about that.
The reason why I brought that up was, I worked out at the base, and was working with a Marine that was going to Athens, and he was talking about being on the first time they put him on a submarine to see how things were, and he was in the wardroom, and the wainscoting on the side, there were lines on the wall, and he asked what it was about, and he says, they told him, he says, depending on what our depth was, that's how deep we were, because the wainscoting, you know, they could mark, they marked where it was.
Yep.
And then they said, years ago, what they used to do is they would hang a rope across.
Still do.
They still do that in the rope, and as they went down, that rope would start bowing.
Yep.
Right, depending on how deep they went.
Yep. Yeah.
And then the other thing, of course, which you see in movies too, is when they do a blow, I imagine you've been on a blow, right? Where everybody just kind of.
Brought a photo of that.
Yeah, right. You know, coming up on that, he says, that's cool.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
What is a blow?
So an emergency blow is either usually as a result of a casualty, fire or flooding, and you have to get to the surface quickly. We have high pressure air tanks and we have ballast tanks. When you're deep, you want to try to keep a trim so you're neutral buoyancy. And in normal operations, you just drive the submarine to the surface. Well, if you need to get up quick, then you blow the ballast tanks, push the air out of the tanks, push the water out of the tanks, fill them with air, and you start going up quick. And you use the stern planes to try to control the angle. And some cowboys have tried to, I'm going to try to set a new record for the angle that we're going up. And most are smart enough not to do that because of what happens at the end. So when you're going up from deep, so let's say test depth, so in training, typically you will be at test depth when you blow. And nothing happens, and nothing happens, and nothing happens. And then suddenly the bow comes up, and then suddenly the whole submarine starts shaking. And then suddenly it's like a runaway freight train as you're heading up at a relatively steep angle, not as steep as many would have you to believe, but you're going fast. And fast enough where pretty much the bulk of the submarine comes up out of the water and then slams back down. Well, in the coming down, you lose control of the submarine. So it will roll, it'll go under, and you got to get, got to get her going again. It's not that part. Well, it's exciting. You hang on. You know you're going to be okay, and even that's exciting. But you don't want to hurt anybody. You don't want to break anything. So most commanding officers won't get carried away with that. But it is fun.
We had that one when they blew and they hit a Japanese.
It's a Japanese ship. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't pay attention to
Yeah.
what was above them.
So, yeah, you get, just like any other service, you fight complacency all the time. You fight complacency.
Can I ask, as a submariner, how accurate in your mind does Hollywood portray the submarines? Like the Hunt for Red October, just to use one, or
Well,
House
did you ever see the series, the TV series, Pink Submarine? That was pretty good. Anybody remember that?
No.
Oh.
Pink submarine?
Pink Submarine, it had women on board and,
Huh.
Kelsey Grammer.
yes.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So, actually, they're pretty good. It is a pretty good portrayal. I love submarine movies. And,
Yeah.
and I would get disgusted if, they didn't give us a good portrayal.
Like Run Silent, Run Deep,
Yeah.
World War II.
Yeah. Hunt for Red October
Yeah, I thought
Yeah,
that was
it
pretty
was
good.
was pretty good.
That was a good movie.
And that was good because they kind of showed that some of the expertise that we bring on board a submarine, when it's deployed. So the teams that we sent, typically when I count up the number of deployments, the total number of deployments that we had in our team that we sent, which would be 7 to 12 guys, it exceeded the number of the number of deployments that the rest of the crew in totality had made to forward areas. So they knew how to operate the submarine. They did lots of training. They were really good, but nobody gets enough time actually operating forward. So we helped make up for that.
So you're quoting some British admiral. You came in 73, you were the first submariner. You talked about the camaraderie of the crews.
Yeah.
I'm at Rickover, I was in DC, I was Air Force. But he would hand select everybody that got on
Yeah.
their submarine. He personally interviewed them,
He did.
you're in, you're out.
Yeah.
I had a friend that worked in his office, he said he was brutal.
There
He
are
was
all
brutal,
kinds
yeah.
of stories about Admiral Rickover and his interviews and the tricks that he would play on officers just to judge their psyche, their ability to handle pressure. It'd scare them. There have been books written about that. Fortunately, I didn't have to do that. What I did have to do was polygraphs. Has anybody ever had a polygraph? Fun, huh? I had to do one every 5 years. Plus, I had to do an extra one for an assignment that I'd been given, a special assignment.
They need to polygraph these young kids, they're given top secret clearances without any background checks.
Yeah.
So every 5 years, I had to have a full background check done and a poly. And I had the strangest conversations with my neighbors when we were living off base. They'd knock on my door, and I don't know if I have to worry or not, but these guys came and visited me yesterday, and they had all kinds of questions about you. Are you in trouble?
Let's hope not.
Where was I? So back to submarines. Questions that people typically ask me. Why would anyone want to go to sea on a submarine? I think I've covered that. Didn't you get claustrophobic? No. For some reason, I never did. And there's something I'll add to that. Although there was typically on a deployment, maybe ballpark 125 sailors on a submarine. They're not all up at the same time. The crew stood 6-hour watches, 6 on, 12 off. So they were always rotating, they were always in a rotation. We riders, because they didn't have so many racks for us, we stood 12 on and 12 off. So we were work for 12 hours and we were off for 12 hours. And in our off time, I was qualifying, we were doing other things, we were doing field day, cleaning spaces, eating, maybe playing some cards, playing some euchre, like that, when we could. So hot racking. Hot racking is when two sailors share the same rack. So we're sharing the same rack, we're sharing the same locker. The guy that I relieve goes in, after I wake up, get something to eat, go to work. The guy that I relieve gets in the same rack. That's hot racking. Now, when I was junior, I hot racked in the bomb room. This is what we call the torpedo room. And my first submarine that I was on, my rack, my mattress, if you call it a mattress, was on a torpedo rack. It was empty. Torpedo was in the tube. And on the right side of me was a Mark 37 torpedo. I don't know, maybe weighed 2,500 pounds. On the left side of me was a subrock. A subrock is a submarine rocket that would be launched out the torpedo tube and would go up in the air, fly to a predetermined place and distance, and go into the water and explode. It was an anti-submarine weapon. All subrocks were nuclear tipped. They were all nukes. And there's an example of one in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. And I saw one and was able to tell my grandkids about it. So I had a torpedo on one side of me, and I had the subrock on the other side with this, black and orange radioactivity sticker on it. And once again, I said, "Oh my goodness, what have I got myself into?" and when we were up at periscope depth, we would still, if the seas were rough, we would still rock, and that torpedo would clunk, 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 and the rocket would go clunk, clunk, clunk. I didn't get much sleep. My best hot racking story, though, was forward in the torpedo room. My rack was inside the hull of the ship, and we were in cold water, really cold water. And the hull was, in this part, much of the hull is usually coated, but in this part, it was bare metal. It was cold in the torpedo room. So I slept in my poopy suit with a blanket over me, and I didn't pay much attention to that condensation. I woke up in the morning, my sleeve was frozen to the hull. Frozen. Luckily, my skin wasn't, but my sleeve was frozen to the hull. Seawater freezes at 28.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was not frozen outside the hull, but that condensation inside had frozen and turned into ice, and I got stuck. And I'm yelling out, "Hey guys, what do I do about this?" So they came over and they helped unstick me. And I learned after that to stay away from the hull. That's part of life on submarines. As I got more senior, still hot racked until I got commissioned, until I rode as an officer. But at least I was in regular racks. So I'll shift to food. Another question is, how do you guys eat when you're gone that long? Don't you run out of food? Well, you can't run out of food. What we do is, before we get underway, we pack every nook and cranny of that ship with food. You walk on cans. All the passageways are covered with cans. Cans are covered with cardboard, which gets pretty dirty after a while. On a mission that we knew was going to be long, we knew from the beginning it was going to be long, we carried extra food, a lot of extra food, and we had 2 layers of cans on the decks. So it was probably, at least a foot. Submarine racks are only about that tall. You get in there and you lay on your back, and if you're small like me, you can roll over, just barely roll over. Well, they gave me the bottom rack. They're smarter than I was. Just give this rider the bottom rack. He's gonna like it. Doesn't have to climb up over everybody. You get out of the rack, it's easy in and out. Well, not when they stack 2 layers of cans. So I'm laying in my rack and I see these cans and I've only got about this much space to get in and out of my rack, which is why they picked both a rider and a small guy, a little guy to go into that rack. And so food, the refrigerators, they normally have chill boxes on a submarine. They all get turned into freezers. So load all the frozen food in their bucket, get all the steaks in there, all the good stuff. Cans go on the deck, dry foods go to wherever we can put the dry foods. The good part is eggs, fresh eggs, potatoes, onions, they go in the torpedo tubes, which typically in colder waters stay nice and refrigerated, nice and cold. And they actually lasted quite a while, and we had to eat them up. We had to eat them up before they went bad. So we ate really well coming out of port and on our way to the mission area.
What did you do with all the empty cans and all the cardboard and all the stuff that it takes to cook stuff like that?
So submarines are very efficient. Once you get into a patrol area, you don't want to be sending stuff out.
Exactly.
We have trash compactors, and we have what we call TDU, a trash disposal unit, which is a pretty big tube. So you compact the trash into these cans. You weight the cans down and put them in the TDU, close the top valve, open the bottom valve, and you shoot them out the bottom of the submarine. We don't want to do that in the patrol area.
No.
It's noisy, you don't want to leave any evidence behind. So everything gets saved on board. As we eat food out of the freezer, the garbage gets compacted and goes back in the freezer. The cardboard, when we can get rid of it, it'll go out in TDU, but typically it's folded up, it's wrapped up, and it's just stuck wherever we can stick it. Great question.
Yeah, then when you get back to port, you gotta unload all of that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Water?
Well, how did you generate water?
So submarine has to manage all of its environment. Water on board, we had evaporators. We had a main evaporator and a backup evaporator. On a submarine, there's a backup for just about everything. How it works is you take the hot water or steam that drives the turbines, that drives the propeller, and it goes through this evaporator, and it heats up salt water, it makes it boil, and then we take the condensation, and that's our fresh water. So we use we call them evaporators, but we use condensation to get our water. Air is the same thing. All air is recycled. Carbon dioxide, the biggest threat. A lot of people in a small space generating a lot of carbon dioxide. So we have carbon dioxide scrubbers, and they're chemical scrubbers. And the most common, at least when I was writing, was a substance called amine, and it would absorb carbon dioxide. And so that's how we pull the carbon dioxide out. We made our own oxygen. So water is H2O. It's hydrogen and oxygen. So through some engineering miracle, electrolysis, we would separate the hydrogen atoms from the oxygen atoms, feed the oxygen into high pressure air tanks, and we would lead the hydrogen, which is very dangerous, it's explosive, we would bleed it out, tiny bubbles that no noise. We'd bleed it off board the submarine.
What the water taste like after you run through all of that? Is it just like water here?
So there's nothing on a submarine, after you're out for a while, nothing on a submarine tastes good.
Okay.
Just because of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Your nostrils, your sinuses, everything is just polluted. And you really lose your sense of taste. We riders, typically, I think probably every team had what we called a spook night, where we cooked the evening meal. And we would try to bring in food that the submariners didn't normally have. We wanted to bring in a fresh taste. And it worked. It really worked. We got really creative. And I deployed as a lieutenant, as an ensign. I was still an ensign. I had a sailor take leave and he went to Virginia. And he called up from home and he says, "What about Virginia hams?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "What about Virginia hams?" I said, "What are you talking about?" "For spook night." And I said, "Can you get them?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Bring them." And he said, "How many?" I have no idea. He said, "Ask your mom. How many hams do we need to feed 120 people?" And we carried them on board the submarine, and we found places to hang them. We hung those hams. The crew was okay with that. But then we came walking aboard with cases of beer. We're going across the brow hauling all these cases of beer. And then suddenly over the 1MC, the loudspeaker, Ensign Brokaw, report to the XO stateroom. He got the word. These idiot spooks are bringing beer on board. And so I knew what I was getting called for, so I went down, I grabbed the can and took it up there. And I said, "Sir, it's alcohol-free beer. It's alcohol-free beer. Read it, alcohol-free beer." And he goes, "Navy says no beer at sea. They don't say except for non-alcoholic beer. They say no beer at sea." Well, come on. If you don't let us bring this aboard, we're all going to have to go out and drink it up tonight. And so he chatted with the CO. The CO looked at the can. And he says, "All of them are like this?"
Yeah.
"Yes, sir." And we found places to not only, the crew helped us with this, they found us places to stash the beer, not only stash it, but lock it up. And when we finally got around to spook night, a month and a half later, or 2 months later probably, we broke out those beer cans and carted them into the freezer to get them cold, and we were only missing 2 cans. So there were only probably one sailor or 2 that had access to the key that couldn't resist. And,
What was the average temperature on one of these long missions on the inside of the ship?
so the atmosphere is well controlled in a submarine. So in a submarine, it's like being in a house and you have your furnace running at full blast and you have your air conditioner running at full blast at the same time. Because aft, in engineering spaces, you have a nuclear reactor, you have steam turbines, you have steam turbine generators. It's hot. It is really, really hot. Being a little guy when I was junior, my first submarine ride in field day, they sent me back aft because we had these, all this equipment and there wasn't much room. And I had to crawl up there, to clean the tops of this stuff. And it was hot. It was so hot. So forward of the reactor compartment, it's nice and cool. Typically we keep it cool. It doesn't get hot.
What's cool, about 54?
Oh, no, I would say 65, maybe just ballpark, something like that. It's cool, but not cold.
Now, we talked about food, water, air, when you go to the bathroom.
My favorite sea story. Thanks, Dan. This is the one I love to tell my grandkids. And I like to tell it to sailors that I meet who want to become submariners, and they're asking me about submarine life. So yeah, what goes in has to come out. So how do we handle human waste on a submarine? It's a little different now today, but then we had what we called soft tanks and hard tanks. Soft tanks we would put gray water in and just pump it overboard. Hard tanks were for the not gray water, poop. Because we didn't want to, back then, we didn't want to pump it overboard because it could foul the pumps. And if you're deep, that's a lot of pressure that you have to overcome. You have to push it out of the submarine. So you have this hard tank, and by hard, I mean it can withstand the sea pressure. And then once it gets to a certain level, you use high pressure air, very high pressure air, to push the effluent out of the submarine. And so you get it down to a certain level and you stop because you don't want bubbles coming out. It makes noise. So now you're left with this tank full of high pressure air. What do you do with it? What do you do with it? Any ideas?
No.
You vent it inboard.
Inboard, that's got smell.
So, not to be crude, but it's like a giant fart coming back into the submarine. Where do they release that inboard? Where do they vent it?
I'm in the lowest part.
You're not gonna, good, that's a good one, I like the way you think. You're not gonna release it, you're not gonna vent it into operational spaces. People are trying to work.
Yeah.
You vent it into the berthing compartment where people are trying to sleep.
Sweet. Oh.
And you wonder why submarines stink? When I came home, Charlene would not allow me to bring my sea bag in the house. I had to dump it in the yard, and she had it lay out there for a couple of days, hoping it would rain. She would not allow me to bring my stuff in the house. So the deeper you are, we like to do that when we're shallower, but if you're on patrol, it depends on the tactical situation. Sometimes you're deep, and you want to stay deep, and the tank's getting full. So it takes a long time to vent that back into the submarines. It could be hours. And in the meantime, they've got these signs on the stall doors in the head saying, venting, don't use the toilet. We had another name for the toilet back then. And well, if you gotta go, you gotta go. So if you really had to go, you need to sneak in there. Well, this is where force of habit becomes a problem. In normal times, when you're done using the toilet, you stand up, you put your suit back on, you pull one valve to let it drop into the tank. You open another valve for the water to flush it. And then you close the water and you close this valve. Well, if you're half asleep or just by force of habit, and you walk by that sign, you know I can't flush. And then you finish doing your business and you get up, and out of force of habit, you pull that, and it's under pressure. It all comes out under pressure, and it gets the hapless sailor. It gets it covers the entire head, and then guess who has to clean it up? That poor hapless sailor who flushed. So in my 8 deployments, that only happened once, only one time.
And it wasn't you.
It was not me. Great question. Any other questions before I move on to the next topic? What are you doing here?
We're over.
Oh, I'm over.
Oh, yeah.
I'll bring you back.
Yeah.
We want to hear the rest of the story.
Oh.
Oh,
what's-
Jim's already on the calendar for next year.
I-
You did say that they do it differently today in the submarines?
They do. There's more technology today in the
Okay.
newer submarines. And I was told that, that they do now also pump, out of the hard tanks.
Okay.
They've got the technology now where they can do that. I want to wrap up by saying that the Navy that I left in November of 2014 is much better Navy than what I joined in 1973. These sailors, they're heroes. Later on in my career, I was sending sailors to do the things that I did when I was younger. And they never hesitated. What the Navy needed them to do, where the Navy needed them to go, they did. They went. And if they had to go back to back, they went back to back. We lost some of them over the wars in the Mideast, primarily. It hurt really bad. We've got a great Navy. We have great sailors. And I'm so proud of them. And I'm proud of the families. I'm proud of the spouses. Now, men as well as women. And I think that you can rest comfortably. And when you sleep tonight, there are submarines and other deployed battle groups and independent deployers out there around the world and in aircraft doing their jobs in harm's way and ready to go if need be.
Can you
I just wanted to share
super,
that with you.
I'm sorry, can you super quick tell about the USS Cincinnati Foundation that you brought brochures
Yeah.
for?
So what do I do in retirement? Charities. I'm the chairman of the USS Cincinnati Commissioning Foundation. When the Navy commissions a ship, it's a big event, lots of politicians, lots of admirals. They can't pay for that. We don't use your tax dollars for parties. So we stood up a nonprofit to raise money to cover all of the expenses for the commissioning that the Navy could not cover. We went above and beyond. We raised money to endow a scholarship. We endowed a $200,000 scholarship for family members of the USS Cincinnati. And we've given out over $10,000 in scholarships so far. And that's since 2020. And we continue to support the ship, their sailors, and their families. They're in San Diego. USS Cincinnati is in San Diego. And we do things for their sailors. We fund morale activities. When the Bengals went to LA for the Super Bowl, we funded a Super Bowl party on the ship. And the ship was in port with the sailors that had to be on the ship. We funded their dinner, catered dinner for them, put up a big screen so they could watch the game. So that's the type of stuff that we do for our Navy.
Tell them about that thing that you invited me to down in Cincinnati, where you had the ship's captain and a bunch of crew.
Yep, last year, thanks Dan, last year, 5 members of the USS Cincinnati, including one of their sailors who is a Cincinnati native, came to Cincinnati for what we call a namesake city visit. And I couldn't be so proud that the city turned out. The Rotary Club honored us. The commanding officer was the guest speaker at the Rotary Club meeting. The mayor invited us, brought us before the full council, gave the ship a proclamation, their support to the crew, to the ship and the crew. The Cincinnati Reds gave the crew a wonderful tour of the stadium, able to go into the locker rooms, to see stuff that normal people don't see in normal tours. Got us out on the field. Typically you don't let just anybody go out on a baseball field. It makes the groundskeepers nervous. The Bengals took us to Paul Brown Stadium, and just unbelievable, the tour they gave us. Put the ship's logos. We have a promotional video. They played that on the big screen. Anthony Munoz was there, if that name means. He's a Hall of Famer, was there to greet the crew. Jim Breach, Hall of Fame kicker. Maybe did hold, maybe still holds the record, or is maybe second now, for the most points scored in a career. He was there. The list just goes on and on of how the city turned out. And our little foundation, there's only a handful of us. We coordinated all that, all the schedule, got Navy permission to do this or that. And it was a great time, and we're hoping to bring them back again this year. If not, then certainly next year.
This is great.
And-
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, that's not fully it. All right. We are gonna embarrass you horribly. You got to sit and chat, so now you have to stand and be embarrassed. Miami Valley Military History Museum and a certificate of appreciation to all who shall see these presents greeting. The certificate is awarded to James E. Brokaw, Captain United States Navy retired, in recognition of his service to our great nation and for his continued dedication, commitment, and support to the ideals of patriotism this 10th day of May in the year 2003.
That is very nice.
Part two. Barbara has been amazing. Barbara's our, where's that? Oh, she is the most extraordinary person when it comes to finding books. And you had said you were finding new boats, stories. So we found this one, and that is your parting gift.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. And Barbara for finding it.
Barbara, thank you very much.
Oh, this was absolutely wonderful. And you are on the schedule for next year. I'll let you pick the dates, but you're on the schedule. Yeah.
I have something for you. This is a coin from my last command. I retired from this command. I had about 1,500 sailors in it. I was the commanding officer, and I was also the commander of Task Force 1050. So I had a command responsibility and I had an operational responsibility. And so this coin, I'd like to present to you. It's from my sailors. My sailors that did so many good things when I was there and are still doing so many good things.
The first Navy, no, we don't do that. This is awesome, awesome. Thank you.
Now,
So
what
we're gonna do a little housekeeping work here. So you're allowed to sit down if you want. We have in our programs, our new brochures, you will find a stamped envelope which has the sponsor a piece of history form. I need your money, we're poor. And there is also a Fairborn Military Veterans Memorial Project form in there. They're pouring much money, but we have first dibs. Let's see.
Can I explain what that is?
Yeah, absolutely, go for
That's
it.
the Fairborn Military Veterans Memorial Project, which is to build a new Veterans Memorial right down the street here. This is to buy a brick that will be around the memorial. So that's what that's about.
Let's see. Dan, thank you for being in the camera. Jody, thank you for doing the refreshments. And Barb, thank you again for finding the perfect parting gift. And
Kathy, would you point out the quilt?
oh
that
my
beautiful
God, yes.
quilt?
This is, this is beautiful, right, Charlene, you made that for him. Yeah, she's, and, Jim has brought some photos and miscellaneous belt buckles and such here and plaques for everybody to enjoy, so don't quickly run out the door. All right, and he'll hang around for a while. I think we're good.